Nick Nurse has been fired today, but that should only be the first domino to fall for this team, because the reality is Nick Nurse is kind of being made as the scapegoat from the front office here, but there are so many other things that really need to change. So, what was the biggest thing that went wrong for the Raptors this season? I really like what Grogan was saying in chat, how management thought the Raptors would improve on the 5th seed, the 48 wins from last season, and would be a better team this season, would improve. So the team was being put out there to win. The team was being put out there to win. And when it became apparent that winning wasn't happening, there wasn't enough of an emphasis on development. And maybe that stalled some guys on the bench. Maybe there was overplaying guys on the starting five. Maybe all those things were in play and were problematic for points for the Raptors this season. Nurse definitely has a role in the struggle with the Raptors this season, but you also have to assess the roster. The roster was extraordinarily mediocre. This whole season felt, or just stunk of mediocrity, and it was encapsulated by the Raptors' record, 41-41. Perfectly mediocre, perfectly balanced, as all things maybe should be, but it shouldn't be in the NBA, because you don't want to be mediocre. You either want to be really good or really bad. You either get a good draft pick or you're fighting well in the playoffs. Nurse could have gotten more out of the roster this season, 100%. And those shortcomings, along with some other things, maybe some press conference comments before a game against Philly, those are the reasons why Nurse was without a job today. And I think a lot of the fans right now really did feel like the team needed a fresh start. The team needed a reset, to start new. And the easiest way to do that is to fire your coach. It's what any team has done. Like any team, if they're struggling mid-season, they need a boost, fire the coach, light a fire into the team. And maybe this was the fresh start that we needed. And I'm in the agreement that maybe this was the fresh start we needed. And I'm in agreement that Nurse getting fired was the right decision. I'm unhappy that it came to this, but the team needed a fresh start. Hey, that's the easiest thing to do. The problems go well further than just Nick Nurse as a coach. There were definitive roster construction issues with this team. And some of the great people in this chat right now, as we're live on Amateur Sports, are highlighting this. A lack of shooting was a distinct problem with this team. A lack of depth was a distinct problem with this team. And I think that was the biggest problem. The depth and shooting go hand in hand, because with the starting five, I had my doubts after the trade deadline. The starting five was excellent. The starting five was among one of the best lineups in the league. I didn't think it would work with the spacing, but Van Vliet, Anunoby, Barnes, Siakam, Poeltl, those guys worked together. But there were so many games down the stretch of the season where we'd have those guys playing extremely well for 35 to 40 minutes, and in the 8 to like 13 minutes that we had bench lineups in, it would get so bad that we would lose the game because of those specific sections. There was a game I remember. It was the first of the back-to-back against the Wizards, right when the Wizards were on our ass for the play-in tournament. We literally lost that game because of a horrible 8-minute stretch to start the second quarter where the bench was in the game. And that happened more than once this season. So how much can you really blame Nurse for a roster that had a fundamental lack of shooting, a fundamental lack of depth, and no backup ball handlers? Like if Fred VanVleet was on the floor, there was no high-quality ball handlers who could initiate the offense in the half court. There was so much missing with this team. And a lot of that really does need to be put on the front office. Now, the front office is making the decision on Nick Nurse. They're making the decision on Nick Nurse's future and chose to fire him. And like I said, it was the easiest way to reset the team. But this will mean nothing. This decision to fire Nick Nurse is going to mean absolutely nothing if they don't supplement this decision with more changes. Now, Masai Ujiri spoke in his press conference talking about how more changes are going to come. More changes are happening to this team. I expect changes to happen. I don't know how big of those changes are going to be, but changes need to happen. We need to get rid of the dead wood on the roster, like Thaddeus Young needs to come off the roster, not take a roster spot. Hopefully we get Otto Porter Jr. healthy. Malachi Flynn and Banton, like, are we still going to invest time and resources in developing them or start with some new guys? These sort of decisions need to be made. But you also need to find ways to bring in talent to this team. Development dried up this season. Development has dried up since the championship. What helped us get to that championship was the development. Guys on rookie contracts being key members of that championship run, like Van Vliet and like Siakam, who were on rookie contracts when we won the 2019 championship. But the ability to find diamond-in-the-rough sort of players, development sort of players, really dried up in the last 3 seasons. You could say that's Nurse not playing guys. You could also say that's Nurse not being able to play guys because we're just not finding those guys. We're not developing them as well. We're not finding the right players. We're not developing those guys as well as we should be. So there's a lot of problems with this team. So firing Nurse, I think, is a good start. But if you don't correct a lot of the roster problems with this team, then the next coach who comes in is doomed to the same fate, I believe, because he's going to be dealing with the same roster inefficiencies, roster issues that he won't be able to overcome either. So the front office management, they need to man up right now and start putting the right pieces on this team, because Nurse is absolutely not exempt from criticism. And I'm continuing to say that I think was the right decision to fire him, not just because you needed a fresh start, not just that at all, but because there were clear problems with him this season. The lack of adjustments he made over the course of this season. The fact that it seemed like the NBA had caught up to his defensive schemes and he didn't do anything about it. He didn't change things. The fact that in fourth quarter situations so often, he wouldn't be able to construct an offense that could score in tight situations, in half-court situations when it mattered the most. And I think all of the things wrong with this team were perfectly showcased in that play-in tournament game. Nurse's inability to adapt correctly to what other teams throw at him. That was clear. The Raptors not being able to initiate a proper offense in the fourth quarter in the clutch. Nurse not being able to drop a play. That was clear. And the Raptors' inability to close out games and stay together was clear. Up by 19 points in a do-or-die game and losing. And maybe the biggest thing, the culture not being there. And maybe the culture was something that lost. And maybe just reigniting something this team will happen when you bring in a new coach. So, what was the biggest problem with the Raptors this season? What was the biggest problem in Toronto this season? The biggest problem, to me, was the bench, the depth entirely. The depth, because the depth was not bringing in the shooting. And people are saying in chat here, like MSJ here, the lack of shooting. I think that goes hand in hand with depth. Part of the shooting needs for this team should have been addressed by bringing in depth. Players that are in your depth who can shoot the ball, who can provide a different role to your team on offense, something that nobody else in this team could bring. And we kind of went with all due respect to Juancho Hernan-Gomez, we kind of went for like the Walmart version in getting him in the offseason. That was just kind of putting some masking tape over the leak. Yeah, it kind of helped, but it didn't really solve the problem. In fact, it didn't solve the problem entirely. So Nurse didn't adjust well. Nurse did not get the most out of this team, but I don't know if any guy could have gotten a playoff team out of this roster, or at least a team that finished in the top 6 in the East. I just can't see it. So this is a good start. Starting fresh, starting new. It's time to get more shit done from the front office. Bring in people that are going to help this team get the ball rolling on finding new development pieces, new young pieces, new depth pieces. And my God, this team needs some goddamn shooters.